It's your host, Rick Houston, and in this episode, we're going to be talking to Warrick Scott, who is the grandson of the late, great NASCAR Hall of Famer, Wendell Scott. Now, this is a awesome conversation. He talks so much about his grandfather's legacy, getting to spend time with his grandfather, getting to know him, and his grandfather becoming an everyday part of his life. And he also talks about what his grandfather meant to NASCAR. I hope you enjoy it.
First of all, tell me, we've already talked for a second about that background. Tell me about that background on your video. That is awesome.
That is from Martinsville. That's from a Martinsville Speedway race. We circa, I'm not sure exactly which race. We circa 1966, 65, 66.
Well,
during some of yeah,
well,
go ahead.
There's so much about that photo that tells a story. That's a photo that truly is worth a million words. Are you old enough to remember him racing?
My father, Frank Scott,
okay,
was a member of my grandfather's pit crew, along with my late uncle Wendell Jr., starting as early as, they were 14, 15 years old. Pitting had been working on the race car since 7. And so they were 50% of the first African-American pit crew to ever perform in NASCAR. And my father went on the crew chief, my grandfather's racing operation, and he holds the distinction of being the first African-American crew chief in the history of NASCAR. Now, to your question, if I remember him racing, I do remember him racing. I actually saw him race twice. Saw him race in Hickory at a smaller kind of sportsman old timer race where a lot of the older guys came back out. But I saw him race competitively also in Callaway, Virginia, out in Franklin County. And I saw my grandfather come to the track, hop in a car he'd never seen before, and run 100 laps. I think, and he finished maybe 8th or 9th, that race. And that race was for a purse. Those guys weren't out there just dilly-dallying around, if you will. They were out there really getting it. And so, I remember many things about him and his racing style and how he sat in the seat. He passed away when I was 13 years old. So, and I was kind of Papa's little buddy. He was a person that picked me up from school in the afternoons and dropped me off to school in the morning and things of that nature. So I was able to absorb a ton of great stories, be reminded of the sacrifices that he had made. So that was a good portion of my childhood until I was 13 years old.
Now, I do have to ask, when you saw him race competitively,
mm-hmm.
How old would you have been?
I would have been, and I got the answer. Let me just get my numbers right. I was 11 and a half, 11 years old,
okay.
Right around in that time. The cancer that ultimately took him set in right around, passed away in 90. I think he first had an inclination of it, maybe late 88.
Okay.
89, it was a quick process, what I mean? But up until that point, he was the same Wendell, man. He was working on cars, making personal appearances, as an overall goodwill ambassador. Was still racing sometimes. He would hop out there and, show up and race and stuff like that. His legend also includes him being readily accessible and a wonderful consultant to many other drivers as they went on their NASCAR journey.
Now, as an 11 or 12-year-old, I guess 11-year-old, and you go into that race, what was your impression of the sport? Now, was this just something that your grandfather did, that all grandfathers get themselves into hobbies or jobs or whatever? What did you think about the sport?
Well, no, I knew I knew very, very, very well that he took racing serious in all genres because he raced in all genres as he rose to the top of the sport. Growing up at the garage and seeing just the cars in the back and the racing tires everywhere, and just knowing the sounds that came along with being in the garage, it was it was to me or to us second nature. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It was just everyday run of the mill. Like if a family had a family-owned restaurant, right? And you look at them back in the kitchen and you say to yourself, "Wow, they do this every day. They wake up this early in the morning." But for us, that's how it was. I do remember experiencing fear. I remember being very fearful for my grandfather, uh, especially in the Franklin County race, because I was reacting to what the women in our family were saying in the stands, and they were just really worried for him. They were scared for him. I guess at that point in his career, and I had always looked at him as Superman, and so I never put fear or anything happening. I just thought he was going to be fine and make it through it. I'm sure, like all little boys think about Papa. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I don't even think that feeling is unique to my grandfather, the race car driver, as much as it is to anybody that's listening to our interview and know and can remember, especially rest in peace to the pawpaws that have passed on. But just to have that person in your life that's your first hero, or your second hero, or hero and a half. The people I looked up to the most in my life have always been my father and my grandfather in any aspect of life.
Now you talked about being your grandfather's buddy, and how close
Mm-hmm.
did you live to him?
Oh, 5 minutes away from each other.
Okay, so he
Yeah,
he was an
so
everyday
part
part of
of
your, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Part of the closeness came from my parents' profession. Okay, both of my parents are school teachers. Living in Danville, Virginia, which is, we southernmost city in Virginia, right on the North Carolina Virginia border. For your listeners who maybe not are familiar, one side of the street you can be in North Carolina, and the other side of the street you can be in Virginia. Okay, that's where we live. Um, but my parents both taught school, but they taught school in the neighboring counties. My mother taught at Chatham High School in Pennsylvania County, and my father taught at and coached basketball, actually, which has a lot to do with my grandfather and I's closeness. But he coached basketball at a school called Laurel Park High School in Henry County, the county that surrounds Martinsville, where Martinsville Speedway is. And so, because of the demands of being a school teacher, they had to be to work at a certain time in the mornings. And so my mornings were oftentimes getting dropped off to my grandparents' house, still with my pajamas on. And then, later in the morning, I would get dressed and have breakfast with them. And then that's when so my morning 5 days a week from probably the age of 5 to 13 was with my grandparents each and every day, with the exceptions of the weekends.
Well, first of all, my sympathies to you, with both of your parents being teachers. That had to just be that just had to be horrible.
Hey man, I went to high school with my father. My father coached me in
Oh,
basketball as well, so I went to high school with my dad, man. So in those days, if you fell asleep in class, he'd be standing over you, waking you up in the middle of class. It could get pretty embarrassing, but but I wouldn't have changed it for the world. We had a wonderful experience, and my dad coaching basketball and being a highly successful, very successful basketball coach. My grandfather and I traveled a lot to his games, and that's where a lot of my fondest memories come from. Is me and him in the car on the way to see my dad play whatever team he was playing, wherever they were playing. It would just be me and Papa in a Lincoln or a Cadillac. And he would be sometimes on those back roads flying and just reminiscing and telling stories about him running moonshine on this road, or pointing something out right off the highway that nobody else would know was there, but he knows it's there because he used to use it as a hideout or a stash spot. You know what I mean? So he loved basketball, man. He was a really big basketball fan, and he was really proud of my dad. You know, my father was in college. He went to North Carolina Central University, historically Black college and university, Durham, North Carolina. My father was a student in North Carolina Central while simultaneously being my grandfather's crew chief at that point in his career. And so he was just so proud that my dad had gone to college and had he was probably just as proud of my dad as being a school teacher and a basketball coach as probably the late Dale Earnhardt would have been about his son racing, or the way the King feels about Kyle, or any of those type of situations. He was so proud of my father for what he had become as an educator and a leader in the community.
I didn't live close to either one of my grandfathers. We might have seen my grandfather once or twice a year on family visits. So I really, I'm kind of envious of you getting to spend that kind of everyday time with your grandfather. And, I would imagine that and you've touched on it a little bit, but I would imagine you learned a lot about life.
I learned a lot about life.
What
I learned a lot about life.
I know this is an open-ended question, but what was the biggest life lesson that you learned from your grandfather?
Well, I'll give you my first reaction. That's such a deep question. I'll give you my first reaction and my first thought. Not one word, but two words pop up in my mental at the same time. And it is perseverance is the word that pops up. And judgment. Those two words, and I say judgment, I would expand upon that and say, he always cautioned me to be too judgmental of people, places, things, situations, and circumstances. And the perseverance that he lived his life with, and the perseverance that helped him make it through some really, really dark times, I guess it's the same thing that helped him put judgment in the right category, I guess. The way he was treated in the sport when he, entered it in the very beginning is nothing short of tragic and disappointing. There's two words that come up, but the way he continued to persevere, his perseverance opened up new pathways and channels for people to look at who he is and who he was in a different light. And so I just kind of learned about giving the window for change to happen sometimes. My grandfather and my family itself, and we always do a lot of Wendell, but Scott Racing was a family affair. And every member of our family played a vital role in his success. And together we are the first African-American family of NASCAR, and we played a mighty role. Some may say the biggest role in building that bridge to diversity that the sport has enjoyed and is beginning to enjoy, and you're starting to see a little different, some optics are a little different. We're my grandfather's legacy is part of the molecular DNA, of that aspect of the sport. And I think that's just a wonderful place for his legacy to live, because it means that the perseverance that he showed and that the judgment piece, it shows what it is equated to. It is equated to things that are steadfast and tangible and that you can see and feel even in 2024, because obviously there's a long way to go. no doubt there's a long way to go. But we've come a long way too. In that same vein. And I guess this is one of those situations where two things can be true. What do the people say? Two things can be true at the same time, or something
Yeah.
to something to something, or whatever they say.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's kind of cool that we're talking right now because I don't know, a few weeks ago, I was gifted a collection of cassette tapes where a huge race fan had sat by the radio every week for like 20 years, 30 years, and taped old race broadcasts. And
Wow.
in one of those tapes, there was an interview that Eli Gold did with your grandfather. And to be
Wow.
honest,
What I would do to hear that.
oh yeah, you're more than welcome to it. Um,
Thank you.
I don't know that I had ever heard his voice, but
Yes.
but
Yeah.
the thing that truly jumped out to me was he made the comment something along the lines of many a time he left a racetrack swearing that he would never go back,
Mm-hmm.
but something inside him kept him coming back.
Yes.
And to be honest with you, perseverance is too simple a word. I think
Yeah.
it doesn't nearly encapsulate what I would imagine and what I feel sure your grandfather went through. Um, what did keep him going to the racetrack? Was it just simply a matter of you're not gonna run me off?
You know, my opinions may vary throughout my family. My opinion was what kept him going was his commitment to his faith and commitment to his family. Um, a little bit further down the line, I think he knew that he had become the leader of a movement, right? I don't know if he signed up. I don't know if he thought he was signing up for that in the beginning.
Yeah,
Um, but I think it became more and more obvious to him that for him, starting a race meant so many other people won that day. You know, he became, in my opinion, obviously the ultimate independent in the history of NASCAR. Uh, but he also became, to me, the leader of the underdogs, man. Right?
right.
And if we look at most situations, most scenarios, most townships, most cities, most states, it's probably more people that would identify as the underdog
Right.
than the top dog.
Yeah.
Right. And he became just a leader of that component of a movement. He interesting enough when you say that he had said, you know what, how many times he may or may not have come to the race. I think it makes me smile because I know how much his faith meant to him. And so I can see him now having a talk with God and reminding himself that hey man, I prayed for this. Who am I to not go back?
Be careful
You
what you
know what I
ask
mean?
for.
Yeah, man. You know, seeing a piece of that. And then also knowing that for many, many African Americans of that time, the job market or how to employ yourself or how to earn revenue for yourself was opportunities were few and far in between. And I think over time, he also learned that he could make a decent enough living with a certain finish or a certain place. You know, he could make enough money to take care of some bills. You know what I mean? And take a little pressure off my grandma. You know what I mean? And continue to help put his children through college. And he put, you know, all of his children went to school. Um, and so I think that was the driving force behind it.
There was also the matter of a movie that
Yeah,
was made.
yeah.
It was the main character's name was Wendell Scott, but I think that's where the similarities I think began and ended. Um,
Yeah.
did he ever make mention of what that movie, obviously starring Richard Pryor, did he ever make mention of what that movie meant to him or if he liked it or didn't like it? I mean, obviously he win the race at the end of the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the movie, God, this is if I have to say, if I have to answer a question, if I get asked a question the most, this would probably be one of the questions that I get asked the most uh, about the movie. And a couple of things happened that people may not be aware of that made my grandfather love the fact that the movie happened. Now, there's some things that he didn't love, but the fact that it happened meant that the place that he loved so much, the place that meant so much to him, which is Danville, Virginia, was on the map. So proud of that. So proud to put the state of Virginia on the map. Not a lot of NASCAR drivers have movies about them. I mean, that's an interest for your fan base. It's an interesting Google search, okay? Do some discovery on which NASCAR drivers actually have movies about them. But also in that same vein, he and Richard Pryor were very close.
Really? Okay.
There were certain people that we now know to be historical figures that were in that movie, and that movie was kind of the things that upped their profile or kind of kickstarted portions of their career. And I'll just name a few. Civil rights icon and legend Julian Bond is in Grease Lightning. There's an airport in Atlanta, a little old airport in Atlanta called Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, where the Jackson part comes from Mayor Maynard Jackson, the first African American mayor of Atlanta, is also featured in Grease Lightning. This is the first film where Pam Grier is cast as an actress beyond the vixen category that she had been attached to. This is Richard Pryor's first film as a lead actor.
Was it really?
Up until this point, he's a co-star or starring as or guest star. This is also the first time that he has a true opportunity to come out of what is considered to be the kind of blaxploitation comedy genre. Okay, there's a couple of interesting tidbits about it. Also in the film, when you see the 34 car going around the track, that is my grandfather driving the car. My grandfather is a member of the Screen Actors Guild. He has a SAG card. He also was with the Stuntman's Association. So when you put all of those things together, and then you look at Richard Pryor's career and some of the things that plagued him, most notably his drug addiction, and when you gain knowledge that during the time of filming of Grease Lightning, he was sober, he was completely sober. In order to play my grandfather's character through methodology or method acting, it forced him to change his habits and his way of life. And this is the portion of his life where he was sober and clean. And this is also where Richard Pryor and Pam Grier fell in love, on the set of Grease Lightning. Later that year is when he was able to ink his big television deal with NBC as a result of the success of Grease Lightning.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. So that's just a little backdrop on it when we weigh it on the Libra scale of was it this or was it that? Now certain portions of the movie, that's Hollywood talking.
Right.
But a lot of that movie is not Hollywood talking. A lot of that movie happened.
Right.
And it happened just like it happened.
Now,
in the beginning of the movie when he's racing the bikes and he jumps over the pile in the bike and he wins the movie. Well, if you research my grandfather's legacy, you know that he fixed bikes. He was really like one of the only kids on the African American side of town that had a bike. And he fixed white kids' bikes and skates and different things of that nature. And this is also how he entered many communities that he was not particularly welcome in. It was his skill set, even at a young age, that brokered friendships or brokered what would be a friendship later. It was his skill set that put him in position.
Right. Good deal. Now, are you old enough to remember the movie being made?
I was not. The movie was made the year I was born.
Okay.
So I was not old enough to remember that, but
So
I was old enough to remember the years to follow, and some of the conversation behind the movie and some of the things that happened with my grandfather's royalties in regards to the film that we're still to this day fighting for. And then the conversations. No, I didn't get a cameo, but I was there in spirit. I was just not entering the universe, but I was there in spirit.
Good deal. You know, we could talk for hours, and I'd love to have that chance someday. But what would and I'm sure this is a question that you've been asked as well a million times, but what would your grandfather have thought of being inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame?
Oh man, I think he would have been proud. I could see him showing true excitement because he was a really laid back guy and he wasn't easily rattled and he didn't show a lot of excitement about things. Definitely a happy person, but not like a over the top exuberant type of guy. But I could see him getting that call that day and being excited, and proud. That's what I think he would feel. The time that it took for him to enter, and some of those things, I don't think that would have mattered to him much, as long as he was able to get acknowledged. You know, those guys that the guys that he raced with, the gentlemen that are part of the Hall of Fame, especially the originals, right? The OGs, if you will. You know, those guys were his brothers, man. It was a brotherhood, you know, and we still have, our families still have the wonderful connectivity with the original NASCAR families, and that shall ever remain. For my family, you know, it's just a unique position to hold in sports history and to be a part of. But my grandfather's legacy extends far beyond NASCAR. He is a member of the International Motorsports Hall of Fame. Just 2 weeks ago, he was officially enshrined in the Automotive Hall of Fame, in Detroit, Michigan, along with Bill Ford from the Ford family, and some other wonderful honorees as well. I don't want to get the name in 2 minutes because I'll forget somebody, but he was just enshrined in the Automotive Hall of Fame as well. So his contribution, his legacy exists in every genre of automotive, in every genre of civil rights, in every genre of, when you talk about sports icons. You know, his legacy is, you know, he's the one, he's the first. And that legacy comes with great responsibility, for myself, and my organization, the Wendell Scott Foundation, as we strive to keep my grandfather's legacy alive, by providing a myriad of important programs to youth that come from underserved, at-risk populations, STEM education, race car simulation, advocacy, and cultural enrichment. You know, those are our tools that we work with in order to level the playing field for youth. And we're proud to do that work. And we've been successful in that capacity thus far, and we just gonna keep on churning and persevering, just like my grandfather.
All right, man. Anything else you'd like to get across?
No, I just encourage everyone to always, you know, follow us on social media. Our website is www.wendellscott.org. Once again, that's www.wendellscott.org. follow us, go to our website. We have all of our social media links attached to our website, so click and like. Also, we have an official Wendell Scott app that can be found on all the app stores. So please go to your app store and type in Wendell Scott Legacy and download our app for up-to-date information and new pictures and cool things that we're doing behind the scenes. We don't put everything we do on traditional social media channels, but a lot of unique content and things we offer can be found on our app, which is the Wendell Scott Legacy app.
I just enjoyed that conversation with Warrick so much. I loved hearing about the relationship with he and his grandfather, which brings to mind, what's your favorite memory of your grandfather? Let us know in the comments below.